So the Council on Foreign Relations just published an Arctic strategy for the U.S., and Admiral Thad Allen was one of the writers of this document, and he's going to be talking to us about some of the results that they found. Admiral Allen, he has addressed this venue before as Commandant of the Coast Guard. I believe you were going to bring your wife with you, or Mrs. Young? Or a Mrs. Young? Yeah. Okay, so yeah, we're ready for her. So as soon as the presentation is up,
I have no presentation.
I think they wanted to put a background on you, yeah, so you look prettier, that's all.
Right.
Or not.
All right.
Thank you.
Afternoon. A couple of prefacing remarks. I'm not a Republican or a Democrat. I'm a devout American. I'm retired and my pension's assured. And the last meaningful political exchange on this topic was when a senator looked over the top of his glasses at me and said, Allen, what is your opinion on global warming? Like I was going to touch that question. And my answer was, I'm agnostic to the science. There's water where there didn't used to be, and I'm responsible for it. And I didn't get another question. So why am I here? I was asked by the Council on Foreign Relations, I'm a fellow there, to co-chair a study with Christy Todd Whitman, former EPA administrator, former governor of New Jersey, and to take a look at strategy issues related to the Arctic in concurrence with the change of administration. We had a very robust cross-cut of subject matter experts, leaders, and so forth. You all know Lawson Brigham. He was on the committee with us. He's back there in the lights somewhere. And I believe there's some slick sheets and a couple of copies of the report if anybody wants it, but it's available on the web. There's not a lot of time here today. I was going to go through the 6 major findings of the report and then make a couple of comments regarding some of the internal discussions we had, some of the more what I thought were more profound discussions we had related to our work, and then I'm glad to go to some Q&A. As I said, I have no slides, and you got me. The intent was to kind of raise our sights a little bit and understand, as the title of the report says, reinforcing U.S. strategy on America's fourth coast. There are a lot of assumptions, a lot of legends and myths, and a lot of preconceived notions about what the Arctic is all about and what the issues are up there. You've got a very multifaceted presentation today, so just listening to all the speakers, you understand that it's not a simple place that's far away and cold sometimes and not getting this cold, and we have diminished ice up there. It's a very complicated place. So let me give you the 6 findings, and then I'd like to make a few comments. The first one, securing U.S. rights to perhaps more than 386,000 square miles, 1 million square kilometers of subsea resources on the extended continental shelf by ratifying the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea Treaty. I'm going to come back and talk about this. Funding up to 6 icebreakers operated by the Coast Guard and having at least 3 operational in the polar region at any one time. I'll come back and address that as well. Improving telecommunication, energy, and other infrastructure in Alaska to support sustained security presence and economic diversification. Deepening work with all Arctic nations, including Russia, on confidence building and cooperative security measures through the Arctic Council. Supporting sustainable development for the people of the Arctic and further consulting with Alaska natives to improve their well-being. And finally, sustaining robust research funding to understand the ongoing profound changes in the region and their global impact. Those are the large issues, and you can find them in the report. Let me just put a finer point on a couple of them and maybe we can lead to having a discussion about it, because I'd much rather talk about this thing than sit here and tell you probably what you already know. UNCLOS. I've stated my entire professional career and as a commandant, this is a national embarrassment that we have not ratified this treaty. You can say what you want about the science and everything else. We were the originators of this treaty. There is no adverse negative economic impacts that can be derived from this. We're short-sighting ourselves by not being at the table when the claims are adjudicated by other countries, most notably Russia, which is claiming their continental shelf almost to the North Pole. Whether or not that has a chance of ratification in this administration, I don't know. But it's time to start understanding that our security and economic interests in the Arctic are best underpinned by acceding to the Law of the Sea Treaty. 6 icebreakers. I understand the National Academy of Science reported out this week recommending 4. Lawson and I were talking, I don't care if it's 4 or 6, it's got to be more than 1. And we got to get the first one built, okay? The biggest barrier to icebreaker construction and acquiring icebreakers for the Coast Guard is not political. It's not related to mission requirements. It's not related to need. It's related to intransigence in the bureaucracy in Washington, where nobody wants to take a step forward unless they're indemnified against the funding. The mid-level bureaucrats in OMB that for years played off the National Science Foundation and the Coast Guard against each other in their budgets, holding somebody at hostage until they can make a decision. It's time to let national policymakers and the real requirements of the Arctic speak to what we need, and not mid-level bureaucrats in OMB. As I said, I'm retired, my pension's assured. Telecommunications, energy, and other infrastructure. You know, we're dealing with micro-communities up there that have very little land access. And we're going to have to come up with a new way of thinking about this in terms of telecommunications, safety, sanitation, and so forth. Basic water and sewer are needs at these outlying communities. And it's time we started putting our thinking caps on, because some of the technologies that are developed there can probably help us in other places. Microgrids, more expanded use of maybe space-based or low orbiting or even balloon supported Wi-Fi and things like that. But there should be a renewed interest in looking at how you deal with micro communities, because it's not just a related Alaska issue. One thing, if you've been up there and you've looked around, you noted we got a real problem with these coastal communities. Some of them are having to be relocated because of the loss of protection of the ice shelf and the subsequent erosion. And these underscore all the problems, including lack of land access and so forth. I would tell you this: if you want to think about framing this problem in a more strategic or global, from a more global perspective, think about the problems we're suffering from migration right now related to what's going on in Syria. And think about the extent of climate migration that we might see, climate refugees, 50 or 60 years from now. It's significant, and we need to be thinking about it. Deepening work with all Arctic states. Probably the most robust, Law of the Sea was a pretty robust conversation. Probably the most robust conversation in our group was the relationship with Russia, and the need to understand Russia in terms of not being so, I guess I would call it all or nothing. We tend to look at Russia as a monolith, and in some ways it is. But when we're looking at issues related to Syria, the Ukraine, the Crimea, and so forth, those are issues that are certainly important. But the fact of the matter is we share a waterway with Russia. We share EEZs. We share common challenges associated with protection of the EEZ, fishing enforcement, and so forth. There has to be a way, while we deal with the larger issues with Russia on security, to continue a dialogue and a conversation. That is probably best done in conjunction with the other Arctic states, and it's probably best done with cooperative efforts that are not related to security, where there may be a disagreement between Russia and ourselves. And we already have agreements in place that underscore this. Search and rescue, oil spill response, and basically what connects the Arctic region now that supersedes national boundaries are the indigenous people. And we think there needs to be a much more robust discussion that links Arctic states together. And we did a pretty good job of advancing that in our late chair of the Arctic Council until this last spring. that needs to move forward. There needs to be a more robust R&D framework to operate from. We had a science ministerial this last spring here in Washington. That needs to continue. Some of the things that are underway that we need to focus on because they are ways to continue our interaction with Russia, whom we share a waterway with. One is the implementation of the International Polar Code, which sets forth, if you're signatory to the IMO treaties, certain requirements to strengthen the vessels and make them more safe to operate in the Arctic. How do we actually enforce that moving forward? As it stands right now, the U.S. can only enforce these treaties if the vessels are calling in a U.S. port. Merely transiting through territorial seas or transit waters doesn't necessarily at this point give cause to actually board and find out what's going on aboard these vessels. I think moving forward we have to figure out a more robust way to be able to ascertain whether these ships are being operated safely in those environments consistent with the Polar Code. I think as we see the changes in the conditions in the ocean, water temperature and so forth, the issue of fish stocks, we placed a moratorium on fishing north of the Bering Straits. That was a temporary measure because we did not know what we didn't know. I think we're going to have to take a look at that moving forward. And sooner or later, that's going to have to be integrated with international regimes regarding not only regular fishing, but also illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing. In general, the problems in Alaska in some cases are precursors to what we're going to see 30, 40, 50 years from now in other parts of the world. We can take advantage of the situation that's up there right now and develop a cohesive, comprehensive strategy that will work to the benefit of the native populations up there, the overall security and transportation issues in the region, but moreover, will give us the intellectual capability, competency, and base to understand what's going on as we start addressing these problems elsewhere in the country. You know, we got seawater coming up through drainage grates in Coral Gables, Florida right now. So this is a global issue. Whether you believe the earth is warming or not, I don't care. There's water where there didn't used to be, and we're all going to have to deal with it. So the report is available on the web. I'm not going to get any more detail on it. I'd be glad to answer some questions. I know we got a short amount of time and you're going to break here. So why don't we break and I'll talk about whatever you want to talk about, folks. But thanks for having me.
Thank you. There's some microphones available now, so if anybody's going to make, you know, hopefully you're going to make use of it if you want to make it.
If you can, I can repeat the question.
Any questions?
I see a hand back there in the clouds.
Admiral, thanks for that great talk, for your candid remarks. So my question is, with all the agencies developing their own strategic plans and prioritizations for the Arctic, how do we pull that together into a more strategic national plan?
Yeah, two points on that, and thanks, I should have addressed it in my remarks. In the last administration, we had an Arctic Executive Committee that was headed by a former ambassador to Sweden, Mark Brzezinski. We need a governance structure, whether it's that one or another one. We're going to have to come to grips with how we integrate what's going on across government between the Defense Department security issues and the rest of government and the private sector. If you'll note, they just this week recreated the Space Council, headed by Dr. Scott Pace from George Washington University. I think there's something to be learned from that. I also think there's something to be learned from some policy changes that were made right at the end of the Obama administration that actually came up with a national plan for space weather. Now, these aren't Arctic specific, but these are frameworks, doctrines, and policy platforms, if you will, allow you to kind of coordinate across government. So there's going to have to be something there. And the second one is a permanent high-level representative for the Arctic in the State Department, whether that's ambassadorial rank or assistant secretary. You know, in our view, you can call it either way. But there needs to be somebody designated to be that international emissary for the Arctic. Thanks for the question.
There's a question from the online. You did mention UNCLOS, importance of UNCLOS. So is there any strategy under development to get Congress to consider its ratification that you know of?
There was actually, after Russia, the most extended discussion in our group was UNCLOS, or one or two. They were very close. There were actually people who were so frustrated having this issue be around since the 1970s. They were starting to think about other more limited multinational or bilateral agreements we could make that would extend our purposes and issues in the Arctic. And the committee kind of split, the task force split on whether or not we should make a recommendation to go for some kind of a lesser agreement and then back off the original premise of the Law of the Sea Treaty. In the end, the task force decided that it is important that UNCLOS be considered in its current form, and it needs to be brought to the floor of the Senate for a vote. The question is whether or not you can make a compelling political case to do that. This is one of those things where, in the light of the policies of the current administration, you can make a case both ways. There are certainly economic and security issues for ratifying the Law of the Sea Treaty and then being party to the claims that are being placed by Russia and other states up there. There's also economic reasons why we'd want to make a claim on an extended continental shelf and have that validated by an international body. On the other hand, there are always folks out there talking about sovereignty issues. I don't see any sovereignty issue or even pseudo-sovereignty issue that's been raised since I've been working this issue, which is like 40 years, in my view, that overpowers the logics of acceding to the treaty.
Thank you. There's another quick question. What do you mean by ecumenical about science, since science is a belief system?
Oh, I think, I said I'm agnostic to the science.
Okay, agnostic.
Yeah. That was probably too glib to use on a elected official, but that's what I said.
That's fine. There's someone called Joe Costi, and he comments, "We miss you, Thad Allen." Whatever that means.
I miss you too.
Well, thank you very much. And we're giving away glass wipes, which probably I need because I think I misread my notes. And I was really referring to Congressman Young that's planning to bring his wife. So, but, you know, I see the likeness.
I know Congressman Young very well. I don't know which one of us is insulted.
But in any case...